I've just got to say, from a personal point of view, Dorsett has a new, well, fairly new apartment hotel concept, Dow, which actually is only 200 yards from my house in Shepherd's Bush, which is great. And it's also interesting because it is a concept, isn't it, a part hotel concept. And also during the pandemic, you housed NHS workers there, didn't you? National Health Service workers, so I applaud you for that. So let's find out exactly why we are talking about this. In a way, it's obvious, and it should be obvious to you if you're involved in hotel investment in the room, because we are talking about a country that is vying to be, still, the world's biggest economy, with the world's largest population, although India is very close at the moment. Now, we should know this. China is the largest source market for Southeast Asia. And it's also potentially quite huge for this region, I think, which is particularly pertinent to why we're talking about it today. I do notice, for example, that Oman has tried to get first mover advantage, hasn't it? And maybe we'll talk about that. But let's, I mean, there are lots of other facts that we can come up with which tells us why the outbound Chinese traveller, is so important. And maybe they'll come out as we talk. But I think just for context, let me ask both of you, how and why did the outbound Chinese market first become so significant? Oliver, let me ask you first that. What happened originally?
Well, I think it's a correlation to the overall economic success of China. And maybe just a little bit of context is, with a word as Deutsche in our company, why am I talking about China? We are part of a company called H World Group. H World Group is, by any measure, somewhere in the top 3 to 5 hotel groups worldwide in terms of either room count or number of hotels or market capitalization. We operate through Deutsche Hospitality, our international portfolio of hotels, about 140 hotels, as you mentioned. But we operate and franchise 8,500 hotels in China. And our focus is very much to bring these two powers together of two of the world's strongest outbound markets, the German travel and the Chinese travel, sort of as a strategic focus areas for us. So obviously I am not Chinese, nor does it say China in my company, but we are part of that. So I'll share my perspective and my views within that context. In terms of the rise of the Chinese travel, at the end of the day, it is obviously directly correlated to the enormous economic success of China. And I would say there are 2 or 3 major drivers from my perspective on it. If you look at in the year 2000, the outbound travel of China was about 14 billion. In 2020, in 2019, that was 277 billion. And with that, it was by a long shot the largest spender of international outbound travel in the world. The contributors to that are, first of all, the rise of the middle class in China. Again, somewhere in the late 90s, around 2000, the middle class made up about 3% of the Chinese population. Now it's approaching 55%, and it will surpass that significantly in the next couple of years. So the shift out of poverty or lower income in China is probably unprecedented in the history of Western economies. Secondly is the correlating rise of income. So disposable spending of Chinese travelers, of Chinese population for travel has significantly increased in combination with that. And then also, of course, the cost of living in China is still somewhat lower than you would compare it with comparable countries in the rest of the world. So the ability to have disposable income for travel has risen significantly. And then you've got underlying structural issues, such as the issuing of passports and visa, which a few years ago you would have to wait 6 months for a passport in China. Now it's 10 days, and you have 80 countries around the world for which the ADS agreement, the mutual visa agreement, has been instituted, including Saudi Arabia and Oman. So that is a huge opportunity for these two countries.
Jasmine, I mean, yes, massive market, obviously, before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, still now a huge market. But what's changed, would you say, when it comes to the Chinese traveler and what they're looking for?
Okay. Certainly, Dorsett Hospitality, we are a Hong Kong-based hospitality chain we are owner, operator, developer of hotels. So we operate mostly in Asia and Europe with 63 hotels, much smaller than the world. But we are quite unique, is that we combine the East and West in our hotel concept. And we certainly benefit a lot with this Chinese outbound travel historically, because usually the first stop when mainland Chinese tourists come out from China, they will stop in Hong Kong. Hong Kong still remains as the top destination for Chinese outbound tourists. We have 10 hotels in Hong Kong. We're the largest hospitality chain in Hong Kong. So mainland Chinese are very familiar with our hotel. So when they go out, right, we follow the Chinese wallet strategy. So we follow wherever the Chinese tourists want to go, right? Post-pandemic, we see that actually the recovery is quite strong, right? But it's still not yet to the 2019 level. In 2019, we see 150 million Chinese outbound travelers. Right now, it's only about 2/3 of the level. So far this year in 2023, we saw about 110 million border crossings from China. In 2019, the 150 million Chinese outbound travelers spent about US dollars 256 billion, right? But that's only a fraction, a very small percentage of their total spend within their total spending power. Basically, in 2022, Chinese spend, the middle class, we're not talking about the whole Chinese population, only about 700 million people, the middle class, about 50% of the population, to spend $7.3 trillion. So 256 billion is a very, very small percentage. We see huge room to grow in terms of the number of outbound travelers, also in terms of the budget. But they are probably now quite different post-pandemic, right? Now we also heard from other panelists is that they're looking for more customized, personalized experience, right? They also, post-pandemic, they want to spend time with their family, right? So maybe they don't want to spend join a huge group or group travel, right? So they want to do a lot of research on their own. So this we call it in hotel lingo, free independent traveler, FIT travelers, right? So those people are looking for more personalized, customized experience. So we at Dorsett, we have, first of all, we have, each hotel, we have at least several Chinese-speaking staff. And then we also, use WeChat, the most popular social media channel, to communicate with them, not only on their bookings, but also on how to curate the experience. We would help you unearth those hidden gems in the local destination, local food, local entertainment, sports, local sightseeing that only maybe local people would know, right? Not the tour guides who could tell you. So we engage them in those more personalized experience. And then we'll also use, Chinese payment gateways. For example, your WeChat Pay, your Alipay, your UnionPay credit cards. And in addition to all those, while we're helping them with the local experience, we also offer some of the small Chinese comforts. For example, we have Chinese food in the menu. We offer them maybe hot water, warm water, or electric kettle. They can boil the water instead of cold water. So, small things like that made them feel at home in their foreign journey.
I mean, these are not small things. These are big things. They're very important things. And I've noticed as well that the trends are this year, post-pandemic, that I think it's 2/3 of Chinese travelers are traveling domestically or at least within the Southeast Asia region. They're not going far out. Europe, for example, is not as interesting to them. Is that fair or not?
I don't know if it's not that interesting. I think, from our perspective, data shows you that it's very much governed by visa availability. So obviously the domestic travel right around Chinese New Year was the first gateway that opened the floodgates to travel at all post-lockdown. And the second wave was for countries that either had visa availability or airlift. So that sort of was the next natural restriction. So now this past week was the Labor Day holiday in China, and you saw a significant surge of international travel because Schengen countries have lifted their visa restrictions again. We are approaching. There was an added of about 170,000 airline seats on a daily basis out of China into the world. So I don't think it's the interest. The interest is absolutely there, whether it is Southeast Asia, the Middle East, or Europe. But it is a succession of visa availability and airlift that is really governing that.
But are there other factors? For example, obviously health and safety are absolutely vital to the Chinese traveller. They are to everybody, but I think particularly so, I would say, without stereotyping, for the Chinese traveller. Is that, are other countries, as much as local ones, as China ready, if you like, in that sense? Are they aware of the kind of demands that a Chinese traveller would want? And don't forget, in this room we have people who are hotel investors who are thinking about perhaps bringing people to here, this region, Saudi. How would you advise them to make themselves more China ready? Jasmine.
Yeah, sure. In the past, week or so, we have stayed at, some 5-star international chain and also 5-star local chain. I think in the Middle East, right, there's still some way to go to actually cater to Chinese outbound travelers. I think in the travel industry that we are in, we really need to know the preferences and behavior of our target audience, especially for the Chinese travelers post-pandemic. You mentioned, safety, health, security. Those are big considerations when they travel, when they pick travel destination, right? Especially now, they probably read in the Chinese media some negative news about, travel outside. One is that, people read about the war, about inflation, about maybe the unfriendliness in certain markets towards the Chinese travelers. Those are deterrents, right, for people thinking about whether they should travel abroad, right? So I think in the travel industry, we actually need to do, some of these things that I mentioned previously to help them feel more secure, more safe, right, in their journey, and also help them to understand, maybe in certain areas of, this country is safe and maybe certain areas they should avoid. But luckily in Saudi, I think this is probably the safest country in the world. I was out, in midnight, a couple nights ago, feel very safe. And I lost my phones twice in various places, including taxis. I got them back almost right away. So, something like this, it can make Chinese people feel very, very comfortable, right? So I think it's just, for us, we just need to know the preference behavior of the Chinese travel outbound. We do better to cater to their needs. I think we'll have, great success in attracting them.
I would add a small some additional perspective on that. I just spent the last 10 days in our offices in Shanghai and a bit of time in both Shanghai and some other cities. And the degree of normalcy is astounding. There isn't a mask in sight unless someone is not feeling well, just as it was before COVID, which I always thought was a wonderful sign of respect for the people around you, that if you're not well, wear a mask. You see that in some places on public transportation. Otherwise, there is nothing. You've got your usual sanitation stations, all these things that we see here as well. So I did not feel, and I hadn't been to China since 2019, I did not feel any material difference in terms of how sanitation or health was managed at all. That being said, the Chinese traveler is used, or as a citizen is used to a high degree of automation and digitization. So your touchless life in China is an entirely different one as even in Germany. I mean, the Germans love cash, and you run around with a bunch of cash in your wallet, which is ridiculous, which you would never see in China. So that high degree of touchless digitization actually challenges us operationally outside of China, because the sophistication and expectation on digitization is so high. Our hotels, we run 6,500 cleaning robots in China in our hotels. We've got almost 12,000 automated check-in stations, always with the option for people to check in person as well. That expectation is actually, in my mind, the bigger worry I have, is how do we catch up in the rest of the world to be able to make that integrated digitization available to the Chinese consumer, because they're way ahead than anyone else in the world. So that is my bigger concern than health, that we can cater to that. And then you, of course, have, just as we did in the late 90s when we were dealing with the surge of Japanese travel, you needed to make sure you knew how to operationally cater to a Japanese traveler. They had specific expectations. And I think out of respect for a burgeoning, travel economy like China, some of the good practices that Jasmine is sharing in terms of the basics are critical. I would say that food is one not to be underestimated. I always say that every one of us can eat the exact same thing for breakfast for our entire life. It's where we grew up, what our family served us for breakfast, and what culture we grew up in, right? I'm German, I love some cheese and some bread, and for breakfast, well, no one in China is going to eat that. But to be, well prepared with decently made congee or other things, I think is probably a more important focus, to be able to really give that sense of welcome and being operationally prepared. So food, digitization, so those are some of the things as an industry we truly have to be dialed into.
Are we making a mistake if we're kind of generalizing about the Chinese tourist? Because obviously there are younger, perhaps much more globally aware Chinese citizens, and they travel probably in a different way. Do you think that's something that perhaps people here should be much more aware of, that you can't just, as I say, generalize about the Chinese traveler? Jasmine, do you want to answer?
Well, it's always dangerous, right, to generalize about Chinese. China is a very big country, right? Just like Saudi Arabia here. So there are southern Chinese and northern Chinese and people from different regions.
Yeah.
They might have different preferences and behavior, right? But I think in general, there are a few, big trends we do see emerging, right? One is that, Chinese have enough money. In the past 20, 30 years, they have traveled abroad, even though only 10% of the population have passport. But those 10% probably have made multiple trips abroad, right? So right now, when they travel overseas, they may not be looking just buying luxury goods, say in Europe, right? Or staying in luxury hotels. Those may be still part of their itinerary, but those may be a smaller part of their budget. Right now, they're looking for maybe more personalized, like I said, personalized, customized experience with their families or with their friends, right, when they travel. So they're much more digitally, they're younger, 25 to 35 years old. They have bigger spending power than their counterparts maybe in the West. They're digitally inclined. They don't like to use cash, like what Oliver say. And so they like to do a lot of research on social media. For example, the things young Chinese travelers use, including TikTok, right? Including we call 小红书 Little Red Book, including Dianping, including WeChat. Those things, they could find a lot of visual contents and also user reviews. They trust those much more than, say, a travel agent or OTA, right? So they would do a lot of those research on their own, and they would do a lot of the itinerary and planning on their own. So they may not necessarily want to use join group or use travel agents and other people. But they are looking for the hotel, say, when they come to London, they actually do want to know what we can recommend in terms of local offerings, local things that they may or may not find in social media. And they might need our help in booking those restaurants and special experience, right? And another thing is digital touchpoint. I think Oliver touched upon that is extremely important, right? And also digital payment gateway, they really don't like to use cash. So you really need to have maybe UnionPay credit card, better yet, you have Alipay, WeChat Pay, all those, you could help them, to make payments. And then another trend is sustainable travel. We saw from some research, more than 85% of Chinese travelers said they want actually to actually do sustainable travel and consumption. So, I think Saudi Arabia is a great example, right? With this huge project and NEOM and Red Sea Global, but also sustainability at the core of what they do. I think this fits very well into the outbound travel for Chinese. Yeah.
Would you agree with that? I mean, just in terms of the awareness, perhaps, of the Chinese market, of Saudi and its culture, how aware would Chinese people be about that? I mean, maybe, Jasmine, you're a better answer, I don't know, but Oliver, what do you think?
Well, I would say, a few things. One is, generally we should never generalize. That's never helpful, especially about any population. Secondly is, I would always say, don't judge a culture by its politics. We all sort of read the media, digest the media. I think in order to understand China, it's healthy to go spend a bit of time there, enjoy that beautiful country, and understand a little bit about how it functions and how the culture works. So in terms of the expectations, just like any other traveler from anywhere else in the world, first of all, they are strangers in our land when they come and visit. And they want to experience something different, otherwise they would stay home. So it's important to showcase the destination to Chinese travelers in what I think is the emerging theme, and that is to really help immerse in localities. In local experience, the bucket list travel, which is that sort of probably half of the Chinese outbound travel is group travel, and a lot of that, I would argue, is bucket list travel.
Okay.
You got to go to Paris, you got to go to Venice, you got to do these things, and they are very comfortable. Often them
is Saudi on that bucket list?
I don't think Saudi's on that bucket list, but I think the reason why Saudi and the Middle East is interesting is first of all, because of bilateral relations being constantly improved, and the fact that China played a significant role politically recently in supporting the Saudi on the global stage as well. I think that pays very, very well. So there is a significant desire to see Saudi and the Middle East on the side of the Chinese travelers. So I would say be ready, passport, visa, airlift. If that is lined up, be ready, the volume will be there. And then secondly is operationally, I would say, digitize, give people access to their, to the localities and how they look, and embrace them as strangers in your land as you would do with any other traveler. Of course, by default, there are a lot of them, and that sometimes feels overwhelming, right? When you've got, 5.5 Germans show up, you may have 15,000 Chinese showing up, and that just feels differently. So I think that's something that also we operationally always need to remember. Yes, that the numbers are big, so it feels very present, but it doesn't mean that to treat them any differently than any other tourist.
Shopping is important, is it not, to the Chinese traveller? Would great shopping facilities here they would presumably be, that would make
I
it
always
more
wonder
attractive.
about that because, you know, when just having been in Shanghai, going to, you know, the large, you know, shopping centers, there is nothing that your heart leaves left desired, you know, in terms of, you know, global brands and luxury goods.
You mean locally, so there's no...
Then I walk into there's the shopping center here, the Century Mall yesterday, and I think all the same brands. So I'm always curious as to, you know, it might be price driven in some ways, but I do think from a shopping perspective, going back to what I said earlier, is make local products available. What do I bring back that says I was in that destination versus I bought a luxury branded bag?
Yeah.
They may do that anyway, but I do think the opportunity from a retail perspective lies in that local product and the more curated local experiences. I think that's a huge opportunity, especially also here in Saudi.
Interesting. Jasmine, yes.
I absolutely agree. Because, you know, all the luxury brands that people can find in China nowadays, right? So it's not so special anymore, right? And people have bought their 10th Hermes bag, probably, right? So, you know, for me, coming out here, I'm looking for local Saudi products. And it seems pretty hard to find, right? I've been to a couple big malls. They don't seem to have. But we just stopped by the TDF, the Tourism Development Fund, their stand, their booth. They gave us a beautiful Saudi local bag, and also they engraved my name, Jasmine, in beautiful Arabic, you know, put in the bag.
Yeah.
So this is something I can show to my friends and my family back home. This is beautiful Saudi, right? Because Saudi Arabia has such heritage, long history of heritage and history, just like China, but very different, right? So for us, we are very curious. We want to explore. I think the local products and local offerings, if our hotels can, you know, help the Chinese outbound tourists identify those, I would be.
Just out of interest, I mean, because you both, you know, both your groups know a lot about Chinese travel. Plans to set up hotels here in this region? Can you talk about that? Are there any?
I absolutely love to talk about that. We are, you know, right now we are basically in Asia and Europe. We have nothing in the Middle East. We're very new here, but we think there's huge potential here, especially in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is on the top of our list for the Middle East country where we want to put our Dorsett hotel in. So one is, I think it's because the increased economic and business activities. I would tell you, in Hong Kong and China, not a day, not a week goes by without somebody telling me that they have been to Middle East recently, they're going to go to the Middle East, they're planning to go. And then we met the Ministry of Investment yesterday, and they told us they are going to China and Hong Kong next week. So you're seeing all this increased trade, business, investment opportunity both ways, inbound and outbound, right? And two is that this cultural heritage. We think is very, very attractive for Chinese tourists. And then with also, you know, the government officials described to us the Vision 2030, all these giga projects that are being built here, all this huge attraction that take advantage of the unique cultural heritage, but also the best in class for the future, right? Futuristic vision, all these best innovative products and technology will be used in their buildings, in the attraction, in healthcare, you know, all the sectors. This is so interesting and amazing to Chinese. And I think Chinese business have a lot to contribute to the growth here. And we also would like to be, you know, part of the Vision 2030.
Wow.
And in addition, the government official told us that they're expecting 100 million visitors by 2030.
Yep.
And just joking aside, Chinese, we already have 150 million outbound. So by 2030, we could just one country, we could fill the whole Saudi Arabia. We could fill the quota. But demand is there, we all know, right? But I think the government official told us that it's the supply, right? Saudi plans to double the hotel supply from 120 or 130,000 now to 200,000 plus. So a lot of those are in the 5-star, the 4-star hotels and service apartment categories. Those are exactly where Dorsett, we have Dorsett brand, Down by Dorsett brands. So we want to put those hotels on the map here, and we hope we could establish our presence here very soon and be part of the Vision 2030.
You heard that here from Jasmine, first of all. Quick last word from you.
Yes, I mean, obviously, we are here because of this vision. I think I'm incredibly impressed with the sophistication with which the kingdom plans its future, and the level of expertise they bring to the table from a development perspective. We are here. We already have an office in Dubai. We have one hotel here in Saudi, in Riyadh now. We have some hotels in the Emirates, in Oman. So this is a priority for us. We have one of our colleagues here present in Riyadh to help with our development. And across the spectrum of our brands, whether it is from the luxury side on the Steigenberg Icons all the way through our sort of Scandinavian inspired budget brands, we feel there is a lot of fertile ground for conversations here. We're very excited about it. We're absolutely committed to it, and excited to be supporting this growth and vision.
Well, thank you both very much indeed for that. So you underestimate the returning Chinese market at your peril. You'd be a fool not to recognize that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to put my other hat on. Stay there for 1 second. My other hat on as the moderator, and just say it is the tea. You may have guessed it is the coffee break right now. But one thing before I say that as well, on the exhibition stage we have a health and wellness session, and if you want to go to that, that's coming up quite soon. But otherwise, we will see you back here in, I think, less than 15 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oliver, Jasmine. Thank you both very much indeed.